Hey guys, I'm back. It's been a couple weeks, hasn't it? Um, I'm back though. It's day 440 of the Gaza War. There is no end in sight. You are probably following the latest round of ceasefire manipulations. And as usual, I'm here. I'm the guy who's going to tell you I don't think they're going to amount to anything. You're hearing they're close. You're hearing things are close. Things are different. You may have seen Seymour Hersh. He did a he did another one of his ridiculous Substacks. I don't have time anymore, you guys. I don't have time anymore. I'm not going to be diplomatic anymore today. Uh, this is not this is not this is not the day for it. I don't have time for any of these um, fake reports, any of these um, propagandists, no matter what their previous work is, no matter what their record is. Seymour Hersh made a ridiculous report, like all of his previous Gaza reports during this war, that's been pure Israeli propaganda. And this one is almost, I mean, creative writing genre. He says this time it's going to be different and maybe there will be a ceasefire because Saudi Arabia is going to offer Israel a base in Saudi Arabia. So the number of premises that are outrageous in this entire discussion are too many to name. But the fundamental one, leaving aside the logistical ones, which I'll get to, the fundamental problem is the idea that you can give Israel something that will make Israel stop the genocide. That is not how this genocide is going to stop. Israel is not genociding because it's unhappy and it's going to, all you need to do is do something to make them happy. Israel is genociding because it can, and it will stop genociding when it cannot. And the Palestinian resistance in Gaza, the only strategy that they have available to them is to try to make the war long. They can't make it more intense. They can never match the intensity. They can't match the depravity. They don't have that inhuman, psychotic racism that the West has. They don't have it. They don't have what Israel has. They don't have what it takes to turn their side of the war into the kind of horror that the Israelis are inflicting everywhere they go, but especially in Gaza. All they can do is try to make the war long until Israel runs out of all the things that they need. The first thing that they need. Presumably, they need many things to keep the war going forever. They need morale. They need supplies from the Americans. They need their economy to keep going. They need to offer some semblance of a normal life to the millions of Jewish Israelis that live there. And they need to have soldiers constantly turning over. And they need to have morale. And all of these things are going are being reduced over time. They can only be reduced incrementally over time. They can't be destroyed all at once. Not even Russia can destroy Ukraine's all of these things of Ukraine all at once. And that's a huge disparity in Russia's favor in the Russia-Ukraine war. And the the Palestinian resistance in Gaza does not have what Russia has, and Israel has, if anything, more backing from the Americans than the Ukrainians have, than Ukraine has. So it is the ability of the Palestinian resistance in Gaza to say we can fight forever versus the Israeli ability to try to exterminate the entire population with the permission of the West. So perhaps the equation, as Yahya Sinwar wrote at the end of his novel, they are bound by many equations. One of them probably was the idea that the West, the Americans, would not let the Israelis do every crime for all this time. And that was the miscalculation. If there was one fundamental miscalculation made by the resistance, it was underestimating the awesome depravity of the Israelis and the Americans and the West that backs them. And I can't blame them for that. This was beyond my own imagination as well. So that's the overall strategic situation. Can Israel exterminate before whatever the limiting factor is hits Israel and catches up with their ability to continue their extermination? Logistical issue now. So the idea that the Saudis being at the table is some kind of new thing. I've never understood this. I've never understood why normalization with Saudi Arabia would have been game over for the Palestinians. The Saudi Arabia is not a belligerent in the war. The Israelis already had the Palestinian Authority on side. That was game over for the Palestinian resistance. And yet, here we are. So the Oslo Accord that brought the Palestinian Authority into this somehow in between not having a state and having a state situation where they're upholding the security of the Israelis in the West Bank. And they were supposed to do the same in Gaza. That situation, now that you could imagine would have been something to try to preempt if you were a resistance group. And of course, the Hamas tried to do exactly that. But normalization with Saudi Arabia was normalized with Israel before Israel existed. Saudi Arabia is a creation of an American accord, the Anglo-American oil company, or Anglo-Arabian, Aramco, the oil company of the 1930s, the cities of salt. Read Abdelrahman Munif, the oil company and the alliance with the Wahhabi, I mean, with the royal family. There were rivals that could have taken over Arabia at various points. That is how Saudi Arabia came about. That's how you have a country that's named after a single family. That's pretty normalized with the West. It's about as normalized as you can get. Their oil resources are upholding the dollar. They broke OPEC in the 80s, the oil cartel the third world countries were trying to form. They they purchase weapons from America that they don't know how to use and never can use. They committed genocide in Yemen and put their own country and oil fields at risk to do so. They are getting them on board with Israel is not a feat of diplomacy. And they're not a democracy. It's just a matter of convincing one dictator to sign something. And so I've never understood this idea that October 7th was to stop Saudis from normalizing. Egypt has normalized, Jordan has normalized, Syria has normalized now that Syria is destroyed. So that's great. Lebanon, the state, has normalized, even though that gave rise to Hezbollah, which, as it gradually incorporates into the Lebanese state, to the extent that it does, also ends up in this position. So Iraq, the state, is normalized. It hosts American bases, but there's Iraqi resistance in the state that's not non-state. So normalization is here. It's not something that has to be preempted. It's something that the resistance is trying to undo, not something that they're trying to prevent from happening. So the Saudi entry into and the idea that they're going to give Israel a base because Israel wants a base in Saudi Arabia. Uh, if Israel had an air base in Saudi Arabia, and he says it means it's minutes, not hours from hitting Iran. Well, Iran can also hit the base. Yemen can hit the base. So having an Israel is not limited by having an air base insufficiently close to Yemen or Iran. That's not the issue that Israel has. So the logistics don't work, and the story is fantastic. And of course, as always, it's just based on anonymous Israeli sources. That's Seymour Hersh. So ceasefire, it's there's no reason to think it's anything other than another round of manipulations, another round of psychological warfare. The ceasefire talks are the part of the manipulation. Um, okay. I'm gonna talk quite a bit about Syria tonight, but let's go through the fronts. Let's make this as close to a normal sit rep as we can. There are battles going on in Jabalia, unbelievable, not humanly possible feats that the resistance has done. I read about a single. Did you guys read this? Did you guys see this? There's a single resistance fighter that attacked a whole bunch of Israelis with a knife, with a handheld cold weapon. I don't know. And took their weapons, and so I'm sure we'll hear more about that. But that's what I've heard. You may have seen that report. In the West Bank, there's fighting. The Israelis are attacking airstrikes. They're doing bulldozering. They're intensifying their attacks on the West Bank. There's people fighting back there. On the Israeli home front, you guys know that Netanyahu's in court still. So he's in court. He's doing a genocide. He's in court for corruption. Busy guy, I guess. There was an estimate in the Israeli media that there will be 100,000 injured by 2030. So speaking of a long war, why are the Israelis projecting into 2030 when they're negotiating for a ceasefire at the end of 2024? What does that tell you about their ceasefire intentions? Anyway, it's a linear, presumably it's a linear projection, this idea that they're going to have 100,000 disabled soldiers at current rates, I suppose. So they had lots of thousands of wounded soldiers because of the war in Lebanon and in Gaza. More from Gaza probably than from Lebanon even, because it's just the war went on longer. The Lebanon war was much more intense for them. Speaking of Lebanon, steady violations of the ceasefire in between the last time I talked to you 2 weeks ago and now. Sheikh Naim Qassem, the Secretary General of Hezbollah, he spoke and he reiterated that it's everyone's. He talked about the violations of the ceasefire. He said it's everyone's responsibility to guarantee it. He talked about reconstruction plans. He talked about the domestic situation in Lebanon and how they're going to try to make sure they have the election on time. He talked about the fall of Syria, but it was very it was not like a moving eulogy for Assad, if you know what I mean. He basically was like, yeah, we've lost our supply route. We'll find another one. Maybe we'll make a deal with the new government, or maybe we'll find another route. So it was very, very businesslike discussion. And if you guys watched Elijah Magnier on Rania Khalek's show, he said some interesting stuff. I don't know. As usual, I'm not sure. I usually don't hear the stuff he says. I usually don't hear elsewhere. But he said that Hezbollah had a lot of missiles of their missile force ready to go in Syria. They had located a lot around the Golan Heights in Syria, and um and Assad wouldn't allow them to be used. So Assad didn't want to open a support front. Assad was hoping that by not opening the support front that he could prevent the Israelis from further destroying Syria. Of course, it's not exactly how it worked out. Israel was bombing Syria infrequently. Not opening the support front did not spare Syria from falling to mainly Turkey. Let's keep that in proportion. Turkey and Israel and America all invading at the same time, along with some conspiracy, unclear exactly still, ordering the Syrian army to stand down, which they did, following orders, standing down, allowing HTS to take over the country. We'll get back to that a little bit later in this video. But Assad didn't want to open that support front for that reason. And those missiles were stranded there and ultimately destroyed by Israel. You guys, I'm sure, know that Israel is destroying everything in Syria. And maybe that's worth mentioning just in terms of the language. It's a little language trick. Language gives you, language is a tool for thinking. If you use a specific language when you talk about something, you end up thinking that way. It affects how you think about something. When we say things like Israel is destroying Syria's military assets because they don't want Syria to have anything that threatens them, you're seeing the world in that Israeli way, that Israeli security is the highest value on earth, and threats to Israel must be responded to, must be destroyed. And so you end up with that mentality. Israel's not destroying the Syrian arsenal, or has not destroyed, I should say, because it's basically over. Did not destroy the Syrian arsenal because they felt threatened by it. On the contrary, they were unable to destroy the Syrian arsenal until Assad's government fell, because they felt threatened when that arsenal was in Assad's hands. Once the Assad government fell, once the Syrian Arab army fell and HTS took over, that's when they no longer felt threatened. That's when they proceeded to destroy the arsenal. So it's not about threats. I hate discourse about threats to American hegemony, threats to American interests in the region, threats to Israeli security. That language leads to muddled and incorrect thinking. So, all of which, to summarize, Lebanon, the ceasefire is being violated. It's being systematically violated by Israel in a way that, I don't know, who knows? Are they going to even withdraw? Or are they going to use, it seems to me like they're using this time, knowing that Hezbollah is historically known to show great restraint during ceasefire, to try to honor the agreements, to try to honor the Lebanese constituency that wants the ceasefires, that wants not to be genocided by Israel, and have Hezbollah take the blame, which is the whole game that the Americans and the Israelis play in Lebanon in particular, is to genocide Lebanon and say, look, this is Hezbollah's fault for trying to stand up to us. So the ceasefire is being used by Israel to move into places that they couldn't have gone into during the war, to get into positions that maybe might be more favorable to them when the war restarts. They're definitely doing this in Syria as well. They're getting everything into position, the highest hilltops, water sources, roads, destroying the arsenal, trying to surround Lebanon, trying to be able to attack Hezbollah from behind instead of having to go up the mountains the way they did. So all of these are opportunities for Israel to expand, to destroy their enemies, to destroy any resistance to them, to destroy the peoples of the region. And that is what Israel is about. And that is what they're doing. And they're doing it in Lebanon too, under cover of the ceasefire, which is monitored by the same imperialists that colonized Lebanon in the first place and want to hand Lebanon over to the Israelis the way that Syria has been handed over to the Israelis. Okay. Yemen, Malik Houthi made a speech. I think I already mentioned something of it. He said Badreddin Malik Abdelmalik al-Houthi, the leader of the Ansar Allah movement, the effective leader of the Yemen state. He said a lot of interesting things in his speech today, as usual, calling for the Million Man March tomorrow on Friday. He said a couple of points that really stood out for me were one of the most amazing quotes, which I'll probably use for the card for today, is he said, the enemy is more committed to their evil cause than the Ummah, the Muslim nation, is committed to their just cause of supporting Palestine. And I think that was a very powerful point that he made. He made it a couple times. He said, how is this possible that they're more united than the Ummah? They're more committed than the Ummah, even though their cause is not righteous. He talked about the destruction of the Syrian arsenal, and he said that Egypt also could be destroyed in the same way. And that was an interesting thing. I think emboldened by what they did in Syria, this is what Houthi was saying, emboldened by what they did in Syria, they might be looking back at their original plan. Remember, their original plan for Gaza was to expel the Gaza population into the Egyptian Sinai. What I said at the time, and what I'll repeat now if you're new and you haven't seen the other 150 videos in this series, is that Israel would never let the people of Gaza, they would never leave them alone. So they're not going to expel them into Sinai and then let them exist in Sinai in the Egyptian state as refugees that are not under Israeli control and surveillance. If Israel expels the Palestinians into the Sinai, Israel will also expect to be occupying the Sinai. Israel insists on controlling Palestinians wherever they are, including the diaspora, including Canada, Australia, the US, anywhere they go, Israel controls them. It controls what they can say, it controls what they can display, it controls how they can speak about what is happening to them on social media, on the street, in school, wherever they are. So Israel will occupy Sinai if they expel the Palestinians into Sinai. Israel will occupy Jordan if they expel the Palestinians of the West Bank to Jordan. You should not get this twisted. Israel is about control and occupation and expansion. They do not want to get rid of Palestinians. That is not what they want. They want to control Palestinians. Yes, they want to kill Palestinians. They want to kill everybody. They're racists, genocidal racists. They want to kill. Killing is a big part of what they brings them pleasure and reason for existing, but it's not. They don't want to have Palestinians exist under their own self-determination anywhere on Earth. Certainly not, or even if it means under Egyptian or Jordanian jurisdiction. So it was very interesting to see that Malik Houthi was kind of talking about Egypt as also facing a similar kind of threat as Syria does from Israel destroying their arsenal. And I also saw an article, something like, is the Jordanian king a dead man walking? Have you guys seen that? That was in like Michael Rubin wrote it. I don't know what country it was originally written for. He's an American Enterprise Institute. Is Jordan's king a dead man walking? So this was right after the fall of Syria. So this is how neocons think, right? This is how the Israelis think. This is how the Israeli supporters think. We overthrow, we destroy states, we overthrow countries. And even if they're friends, we overthrow them. Even if they do what we want, we overthrow them once in a while. So Egypt in danger of being overthrown, no matter how much they suck up, and Jordan the same. Now, the other thing that Houthi said was, "We don't care." This is the thing, the Houthi refrain, the Ansar Allah refrain. He said, "They bombed Hodeida. The Israelis bombed again. They've threatened us. They're attacking us. We don't care. We will not. Nothing will stop us from supporting Palestine. Nothing will stop us." Um, we're in the fifth phase, and we are looking to escalate. That's his message. And so I think that says something about support for Palestine in the region, that the Yemenis, who nobody expected at all, they came out of nowhere. They did so much, they sacrificed so much, and they're not wavering whatsoever. And militarily speaking, the Israelis bombed Hodeida, but at the same time, Malik Houthi reports, Yemen hit Israel with 2 ballistic missiles at the same time as the Israelis were bombing Hodeida. So it was a real simultaneous exchange of missiles, which which we may end up seeing more of the longer this war goes on. So another little piece of data that's interesting about Syria, which we're going to get to now, is that apparently Assad told the Yemeni ambassador from Ansar Allah to leave Syria at the request of Saudi and the UAE in Syria. So it's clear that Assad was moving more towards the Gulf states and trying to find a way to normalize, at least with the Gulf, to join the Arab League and distance himself from Yemen, from Ansar Allah, not open a support front, even though the Israelis were bombing Syria, not open a support front, which Hezbollah apparently wanted, or allow Hezbollah to fire from Syria, to distance himself from Iran as well. So those are all things that were happening. And I think there's a lesson there, just the same as Gaddafi in Libya survived for decades. And then it was that moment where he decided, for whatever reason, maybe compelled to, I think it's fair, to say, compelled to by the conditions and the accumulation of difficulties, compelled to try to make some kind of accommodation with the West. And after making accommodation with the West, that's when total destruction happened. So that's what happened in Libya. There was like a little bit of a signaling to the West, like, hey, maybe we can talk. And that's when Gaddafi was murdered. That's when Libya was destroyed, and Libya is still destroyed today, 13 years later. And Syria similarly, gradually distancing themselves, moving towards the Arab League, signaling some kind of openness to normalize, and total destruction. And so this is a theme that Nasrallah used to go back to, right? The cost of resistance is lower than the cost of submission. What's happened in Syria is the cost is submission. This is what happens. So the cost of resistance, Syria was helping the axis of resistance. It was the geographic linchpin of the axis of resistance. And it was bombed weekly or every couple of days. Syria was taken over by a leader who expressed open submission to Israel. And Syria was bombed hundreds of times in a couple of days, 200, 300 times in 2 days. So the cost just in terms, just of that metric of being bombed. And some of those explosions looked like nuclear bombs in Tartus. The cost of submission is way higher than the cost of resistance. So Syria. Okay. So last time we talked was about 11, 12 days ago, was when Syria had fallen. I felt like I didn't feel like coming on here and telling you guys, but I came on here and then I didn't do anything. Well, we did our nice thing with the Chow Collective. That was already pre-booked. That was going to happen anyway. And then I took some time away from the internet. I stepped away from the internet, you guys. I didn't want you. I didn't step away from the internet. I've been writing. Yeah, I've been on Substack. I wrote like 3 articles in that time, but I didn't want to show my face around here. And here we are. So there's a lot to say about Syria tonight and in the coming days. I want to say if something, because this is going to be divisive, and some of you might be wondering what I'm doing in the comment section. You guys don't. Some of you might be new. I don't know. But I've been trying to think of how I can explain this. I view the comment section as stuff that I'm publishing. Comments are submitted, and if I don't delete them, it means I published them. And I view the comment section as a really important section. And this is our speech on here. This whole game is stacked against us so badly, and I am trying to build a community here. I'm not free speech, as Westerners understand it, is the freedom for any Zionist, any wrecker, anyone, any imperialist of whatever stripe. And you may not think you're an imperialist, but if I think you're an imperialist, I'm going to delete your comment and block you. So people have said, like, you shouldn't just censor us. It's so insulting. We know we're grown-ups. We know what we want, and so on. And honestly, I don't subscribe to that view. The a comment section can become toxic. It can bog you down in useless discussions. It can keep discussions at an incredibly low level if people are asking the same dumb questions or Zionist questions or sea lioning, if you know what that means. Look it up if you don't. You'll find it funny, especially the cartoons. But there are so many tactics designed to derail discussions, to derail a community, and I'm not having that. And so that is why I block so many people. That's why I remove so many comments, and I will continue to do so, because it is the hefty use of the block button that facilitates community. This is what people don't understand. It's not the freedom of every wrecker to come and wreck this community that enables this community to actually have a useful discussion. And I learn, like, if you've left a comment here and I haven't deleted it, I've learned from it, and there are hundreds of comments that I read, and I generate these I generate these videos to generate comments. And the comments are really good and they're really interesting. But I do delete a lot of them, and I delete and I block them. Maybe, but I think it's about if there's like the last video on Syria, there were horrible comments and I removed a lot of them. There were like 800 comments and I removed 100 of them. So that's like a maximum, just to give you a sense. That was more than 10%, but those were people, that's a lot of people. A lot of people get that wrong, and a lot of people do a lot of ugly stuff because they're supporting Israel and they don't want to admit that that's what they're doing. And they call themselves anarchists and they call themselves all kinds of nice things, but they're none of those things. They're just imperialists. And there's been a lot of that on the web over the past week and a half. And not here. While I have a block button, that's not going to happen. And I cannot tell you how contemptuous I am of people who have used the destruction of Syria as something to celebrate. People who have seen the destruction of Israel of Syria as and giving Israel everything that they want, including half the territory, as something to celebrate. People who have celebrated, people who have like accused tanky, brought back the word tanky. Um, Tanky's our word, by the way. We will keep that word. Thank you very much. And campist, these kind of stupid words that it's just for me, that's just a signal. If you're using those words unironically, that's just a signal that you're an imperialist. And I'm not interested in it at all. If you're coming to this comment section with that energy, you're not going to be here long. I'm going to delete your comment and I'm going to block you. So please don't bother. This is not the space for you. Like I said, these are all just people who are facilitating imperialism. They're facilitating racism. And I have nothing but contempt for them. Even those anti-tankies who have been supposedly pro-Palestine and who are making their living off of various media projects along those lines that are now celebrating the destruction of Syria and expressing contempt for tankies. Right back at you, right back at every one of you. I have nothing but contempt for those people, and yeah, like this was like there was a time 10 years ago when the Syria debate came up when I had the patience to be careful with people, when I had the patience to not hurt people's feelings, but I don't have that anymore. I don't have that anymore. And uh, you can say that you're listening to Syrian voices. You're listening to the Syrian voices that you want. You can say that Palestinians are celebrating. Some Palestinians are celebrating and others are not. And you're listening to the ones who are because that's your politics. Those are your choices. Don't hide behind people from the region. Don't hide your imperialist politics behind local voices. There's always local voices that support imperialism for any number of reasons. You're responsible for your politics and your choices. Um, okay. So that's an expression of why the comment section works the way that it does. And there may come a time when I run out of energy. There may come a time, but like it does become a free for all a little bit after I've posted the next video because I don't go back. So if you want to say some really horrible stuff, wait until I posted the video after, and I probably won't come back here and get rid of your comment. I might, but I might not. That's your best chance. Now, as for Syria itself, I have written about this, so I would recommend my Substacks if you haven't read them. There's a nice voice. I chose a voice with a North American accent and a male voice. They had very nice female voices and British accents too, but I went for the North American accent. You can just have Substack read you the article, and it sounds not too bad. So I wrote one about how we live in a racial aristocracy and all of the rules of sovereignty and territorial integrity are overruled when they conflict with the desires of the racial aristocracy that actually rules us. That was published today. I wrote an article with Joe Emmersberger, my frequent co-author, about Assad's human rights record. We compared Assad's human rights record to Saudi Arabia and the United States, and concluded that of any 3 or 4 regimes that include Saudi Arabia, the U.S., Israel, and Syria. Syria should have been the 4th one that you overthrew. But of course, people who think they're anarchists and just want to overthrow every tyranny, they seem to follow the exact order that the American imperialists want. So this is the kind of stupidity that I don't have time for anymore. And then there were a couple of analytical articles about why Syria fell, the facts about how Syria fell, mainly, again, Turkey's decisive action and possibly working it out in advance with Russia, which is where um, which is what I'm increasingly thinking of these days. So there is enough blame to go around. Assad distanced himself from the allies that had held his regime up, Hezbollah, Iran, the Axis, Yemen. He went towards the Arab League, which instantly stabbed him in the back. And like I said, just like Gaddafi, you make a move towards normalization, and that's when destruction of your state rapidly accelerates. And that happened in Libya and it happened in Syria. Um, the Russian exception that they gave to the Israelis, they just allowed the Israelis to continuously bomb Syria. Russia was not going to do anything that was strongly opposed by Israel for whatever reason. Russia has that soft spot for Israel, and all the Russian analysts have it too. So, or the pro-Russia analysts have it too. So it's not as if I don't think they can plausibly deny that that's the case. Um, and you know, with Iran also having this some kind of normalization debate, Pezeshkian, the president, presenting like we shouldn't try not to antagonize the West, that kind of narrative. So there's a little bit of blame for everybody uh, involved. But the primary responsibility, as I say in the article, falls to the people who actually did the crime, the Americans, the Israelis, and the Turks, especially. Uh, I'm not that mad at Galloway or Ritter. They had a moment. Everybody had a moment. I had a moment. I stayed off the internet. They didn't stay off the internet. But like when Galloway says I'm done with the Arabs, he says I'm done with the Arabs on like Friday, and on Saturday he has Syrian Girl on, and on Sunday he has Richard Medhurst on. So you're not he's not George is not done with the Arabs. I've been on George's show, George, I've been watching George since the early 2000s. Um, and he had a moment. I don't think he's done with the Arabs. But he's also got a news show. He has to talk about what's in the news, and that's going to include um, the Arabs. And he also said afterwards that Palestine will be the last word on his mouth, on his lips when he dies, and so on. So I just think of that as a moment he had, and Ritter. Um, what did Ritter say? He agreed with Galloway. He said, "I can't be more Palestinian than the Palestinians." Palestinians celebrated the fall of Assad. Well, I mean, you know, some of them did and some of them didn't. You can't, well, and Hamas said, we're ready to work with whoever emerges. That's diplomatic speak. Even the Houthis said something like that. The Houthis said, HTS should unite with the rest of the Ummah and fight Israel. We're willing to fight with them. I mean, organizations have diplomatic obligations. Ritter knows that. I'm sure he'll come around too. He also just had a moment. I tried to watch the Propaganda and Co people debating with Ritter. That was really um I think Ritter is overdoing it when he says the resistance is over, Palestine is over, everything is over. Like it's not over. It's not over. Palestinians have found ways to get weapons, and Naim Qassem said they'll find other routes for Hezbollah. George Galloway said, if you don't understand that Hezbollah and Hamas don't have any source of arms, you're an idiot. You're an idiot. Okay, George, I'm not an idiot. Okay, I mean, I don't know. Um, I don't think I'm an idiot. Maybe I'm an idiot, but I don't think so. I think there are ways that they will get weapons. Um, Gaza has a hard time. Would always have had a hard time. There's no way to get from Syria to Gaza, right? So, however, Gaza's getting stuff, they're still getting they're still getting it, or they're not getting it, and they're making it. So, um, the but the other guy, like, so Ritter had that I had that issue with Ritter saying everything was over, and Ritter's been on this channel once, but he's very busy, and I've asked him to come on a couple times since then, and he hasn't replied to me. Um, but but I disagree with him that, I think it's very premature to say that it's all over for everybody, and the Palestinians are just going to be expelled and everything. But the other guy, my God, the guy who made those TikTok videos about Max Blumenthal's articles, that guy was just totally incoherent and pretty vile. Like, at one point he said something like, my uncle fought in the Iraq fought on the Iraqi side of the Iran-Iraq war, and he was upset because he had to kill Muslims, even though they were Shia. So, like, I mean, like, that was just like a slip. But go back and watch. Go back and watch. You'll see. There's a lot of those. You can tell a lot about what that guy's really about by by watching what he says in that debate very carefully. Um, I think Scott did catch him in a lot of inconsistencies, and expose a lot of what's really going on there. But yeah, on Scott's side, I think there was just a bit. It's a bit premature to pronounce the end of the Palestinian struggle and the Palestinian cause, I think. Um, okay, so last thing about the thing I published today, and related to Syria. So let me just relate it, because I was talking about the title of the article is The Grand Racial Aristocracy, which is a phrase that was actually used by some of these British imperialists in the beginning of the 20th century. And that is, I argue, what how they run the world today. So they can commit genocide. They tell lies. We are judged by how we express our belief in their lies. We don't evaluate whether their lies are true or not. We are evaluated on how much we can express how much we believe their lies. They have laws, but they are free to ignore them. They commit crimes, but they are free to not be held accountable for them. That is how they understand the world. And I go through a bunch of these recent headlines around the Syria issue. Um, Among other things, the Middle East is up for grabs. Israel's borders have shifted. We have the British meeting with a member of a terrorist organization. When genocide is permissible, Lebensraum needed for Israel's population. So, relating all of these 19th century racialist concepts to what's going on today. And what I wanted to say was, too, that after decolonization in Africa, especially in the 1960s, when those countries joined the United Nations, they believed in a United Nations that could have a framework of international law that would protect them from being colonized again, right? A world of sovereign states that would be strong enough to not be colonized again. And we are seeing them being colonized again with the same racial ideology, and the same genocidal policies and we have people who um, claim to be part of the movement against colonization that are working for the colonization of Syria. And Syria, like Syria, Palestine, Jordan, Lebanon, these are all part of the same entity. They would, it would make sense that they would actually be a single state, and breaking them up into multiple statelets and colonizing them and having an Israel be there, and now having this ISIS creation be there, and having this American sponsored Kurdish formation be there, splitting, breaking them all up, having the Turks take parts of it. That serves the racial aristocracy. That serves imperialists and people saying that's all good because we got rid of a tyrant is so stupid. It's so stupid. Like the history of colonialism, every colonizer has always spoken of overthrowing tyrants. King Leopold killed 1/3 of all Congolese. He said he was going into Congo to get rid of tyrants and stop slavery. That's the level that's the level of lies and racism that people are believing and buying into when they say it's good that this tyrant was overthrown, and don't worry, give them some time, because in 20 years maybe they'll address the fact that Israel stole half their land. Um, so those of those, I'm not going to address you because I don't assume, I'm not going to address it as a second person thing. But those people that are working for the destruction of post-colonial states like Syria are working for the imperialists. To me, that's as clear as day. And I have as much time for them as I have for any racist imperialist. And you can call me a tanky all day. It's a badge of honor for me. And you can cite local imperialist voices all day. But it's, you're not gonna, I don't see anything other than you trying to hide your regressive oh, look, I fall into second person. It becomes confrontational. It's an inherently confrontational thing to talk about. Okay, I said that was the last thing, but I have one last thing. You guys, I don't think people are understanding just how controlled, how grown in a lab this Jolani and this HTS is. There is someone named Myra, he's a Russian writer. Like when I say Russian writer, like when he writes about, he writes frequent reports from the front of the war, the Russia-Ukraine war. And his name is Marat Khairulin. Marat Khairulin. And he has a Substack, pretty big Substack. And he wrote a Substack on December 13th called The Stinking Legacy Prisons and Concentration Camps of the USA. And he talks about Jolani. Jolani, okay. As a young man, he went through all the US prisons in Iraq. Abu Ghraib, Camp Cropper, Camp Bucca, Al-Taji. This is a full course in the American Hate University. Abu Ghraib is the primary filtration point. If we go back to the example of Ukraine, do you think the Americans just grabbed people off the street? No. And the Americans tested the system in Iraq. All more or less suitable men were taken on the street in suitable places, or in suitable places, madrasas and mosques, Abu Ghraib, the Americans selected the most suitable terrorists. There's a special term, forceful recruitment. Everyone is first lightly tortured so they know the smell of the master, and deprived of any hope for a fair trial. The only way out is through recruitment into a gang. Those who are selected at the first stage are sent to Camp Cropper, primary military training. Then the most talented killers are sent through Camp Buka. This is the school for middle command staff, while the most distinguished scumbags are sent to the Academy of Terrorism, Camp Al-Taji. All 7 caliphs of the Islamic State followed exactly this route. The US prepared an army in Iraq to invade Syria. When the war was unleashed, they transferred the system to Syrian Kurdistan. Even the smallest details are identical. In Iraq, this case was handled by a special team, the 800th and 205th US Military Police Brigades. The torture was carried out by the 325th US Military Police Battalion. It is these valuable specialists who are now working at bases in Kurdistan. In the US, the war in Iraq and Syria is considered one campaign, and this is its fruit. So I don't, you know, a lot of this article blew my mind. I mean, a lot of it is things that I knew kind of in a roundabout way, but the idea that there's like a grad school, a nested set of academies that Jolani is a like a PhD graduate of, is was news to me, all too believable, but and yeah, made a lot of sense. But like when you look at the fact that the one time during the whole war, over a decade plus, that ISIS, the fired accidentally into Israel, they issued a written apology. When you look at the way that Israel has been methodically destroying the arsenal, and all that Jolani has to say is, we're going to go fight Iran, we're going to go fight Hezbollah. When you look at the way that Turkey, their sponsor, has been feeding and arming and helping Israel in every way, and now jumped into the war just after Israel had been, asked for a ceasefire in Lebanon and was under whatever pressure it was under in Gaza. It's extremely controlled. So when this is just the last thing, I guess, when people say like this is chaos that Israel doesn't want, or like this is a chaotic situation that could spill over into Israel, it's not going to spill over into Israel. It's not a chaotic situation. The chaos is for Syrians. What is the way Israel is experiencing this is, I said this on Twitter, like a shopping trip. They are just taking whatever they want, and this Jolani is a exemplary graduate of a system that was designed to produce leaders to do what he is doing now, to destroy post-colonial states and the state power that Israel is worried about, that America is worried about. And again, people who want all the tyrannies to fall, Israel and America are much more afraid of states with armies and high-tech infrastructures and industrial bases and the ability to fight a hybrid war and a communications war and a media war, as well as a industrial war. They're much more worried about that than they are about terrorists, that are, most of whom are under their control and were prepared for these operations under their watch in their multinational prison network. So it's not chaos. It's not chaos at all. It's genocide. It's the destruction of states, and it's the racial order that they're building. So I will leave it there for now. That was day 440. I will be back soon enough. Um, this is me after trying to not be full of poison and vitriol and stay off the internet for 2 weeks. So that's how I did. Um, I will, yeah, look forward to reading your thoughts on all of this and hang in there. Definitely hang in there. And I'll see you in the next. Like I said, please don't bother if you're sectarian or any of that stuff. Don't bother. Please spare me the work if you don't mind of deleting your comment in advance. But everybody who is part of this community, most welcome. Um, and we're sharing our pain and our suffering. But but hang in there. And yeah, Gaza's still resisting. Gaza's still resisting. If you have a spare dime during the holiday season, Gaza funds, Gaza municipality, um, you know, all of these things are helping people stay alive while most of the powers of the world are trying to kill them. So hang in there, help them hang in there, and I'll see you in the next one.